Welcome everybody who is viewing this next episode of the Turntable Discussions. We have the honor and pleasure of speaking with David Bright, who's been a huge contributor to our group, given his research. And so I'm just going to explore with David how he got into the Civil War, a little bit about his background, what he's accomplished with respect to all of his research. So I hope you enjoy the ride. David, tell us a little bit about, where you grew up, and what was the initial impetus for your interest in the Civil War?
Well, I grew up in Central Texas, in Waco, just in time to be interested and intelligent when the Civil War centennial came around. So everybody was talking about Civil War, the books all over the place coming out, and my dad was the manager of a bookstore. So he would bring them home, I would devour them, and sometimes we'd discuss them. We had an Air Force officer at the air base there, Harold Simpson, that did the books on Hood's Texas Brigade and the different parts of it. And he started a Civil War Roundtable. And I was the youngest member of that for 2 or 3 years way back. And I've always paid attention to and read Civil War stuff since. Major detours for naval history, especially World War II, and then just general history. I like all of it, but yeah, Civil War is my home, really.
Got it. So what was the first experience you had with regarding the spark for your interest in the railroads?
Well, anyone who's read my website bio knows I started off in the Navy, and I was doing logistics all the time. I was not the bean counter. I was the guy who organized the ship to be in the right place and made sure the order was put in, and planning how much was going to be needed and those kinds of things. So when I retired and was looking for other things to do and read, I ran across Robert Black's The Railroads of the Confederacy. I started asking myself questions. This guy doesn't answer some of these questions. He don't answer hardly any of them. So I thought, well, I'll just go do the research myself. I'm interested. And then came the question of what do you do with it?
Right.
So as you start getting these piles of information, when I was in high school and college, we used the 3x5 and 4x6 index cards. I could just see me with tens of thousands of cards trying to find something. So, yeah, I finally figured out that the website was the best way to do it. And that's what became my interest, is how to find the information I want and put it into a website so other people could use it. But, basically it's my website. I was doing it for me to organize and retain all the material I found. The website is Confederate Railroads, and the address is www.csa-railroads.com. The idea was going to be that I would do a small website on each of the different areas of logistics. So CSA, this is railroads. We're going to do CSA foundries, and CSA, well, I hadn't finished with railroads yet after 20 years. And, it was essential for the book I put out. And the next one, I couldn't do it without all that information already right there at hand.
Tell us, what are the titles of your books?
Well, this is one of them.
Yes.
Locomotives Up the Turnpike.
Right.
That's Captain Sharp and taking the locomotives from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and hauling them down the turnpike into the Confederacy. And the next one doesn't have a name yet. It'll be kind of a biography of the Confederate Railroad Bureau.
Ooh.
Who the people were in the Bureau, who was in charge, who worked with them, what their projects were, what they succeeded at doing, what they didn't.
Right.
And a whole lot of the names have never been in the public before. And so I'm going to introduce a lot of people that no one knows.
Right.
They also weren't seriously important people. That's one reason nobody knows.
I think you mentioned to us either on an email or a conversation on one of our Zooms where you mentioned the amount of data that you accumulated.
I've been doing this 20 years, and most of that time I had jobs that moved me all around the country every week. So every week I was in a new place.
Wow.
So I had a job that we started about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was through by 1 o'clock. So I had the afternoon and evenings to go to libraries and archives and do research. Again, this couldn't have been done without those two jobs. Just an incredible amount of travel, all paid for by my boss.
Right.
Yeah, I've got on the website right now, I've got about 25,000 web pages. Almost every keystroke of it I've written.
You cover all the main railroads and some that were a little bit obscure. And then you break down the line into all kinds of details around the number of cars and the type of cars, down to things like the facilities as well.
If I can find it about a Confederate railroad, I've tried to post it. So the local maps, size of the bridges going over certain rivers, anything I can find, I put there.
What stood out for you as some things that were a little bit of a surprise, or like, had a little wow factor to it? Anything in particular?
How few cars, how few locomotives they actually were using after about 1862. Wadley, I think it is, turns in a letter to the Secretary of War, says this is the number of trains that each of these railroads has, the main supply lines, and how many they can run each day and how much more they need. One train a day over these railroads? You got to be kidding. I must be misunderstanding something. I don't think so. I think he was saying that was all that the Army could count on getting, was one train of cars per day to support them. Because in addition to that, you also had the passenger train and some other things. But outside my house is a railroad, and we had 15 or 20 trains a day go by it. And I thought, well, they must have had a lot of trains. No, 1, 2, 3 a day. That's why they didn't need telegraph to start with. You knew where everyone was going to be.
Right.
Anyway, that was probably the thing that was the biggest surprise. The other thing I'd like to play with, which I can't find the data on, is how much was moved from where to support the Army. So we know that the corn came principally from Southwest Georgia, and it fed Lee's horses. Okay, how did it get there? Well, I know the route, but how many cars did they send every day? Did it go straight through? No, it didn't. They unloaded it and reloaded it over and over again. What was that? Was that fast, or did it get left on the loading dock for 3 or 4 days before they found a car to pack it on and keep going? That kind of detail I haven't been able to locate anything on.
Do you find that there's much in memoirs versus like annual reports or reports from like ordnance officials?
Well, the annual reports are the foundation of all this stuff, because they explain why they're doing the things. I wish I could find more of them. I've got about but about a third of the reports that were issued during the war. So there's a lot of missing stuff, but most of the main lines, most of their reports got saved. It's the small stuff and the Texas railroads and such. I just haven't got anything. I went through on fold 3 every entry in the citizen file, business and personal, and found in their little bits and pieces, there is a voucher. Somebody paid this guy to do this for the railroad, for one of the railroads. He helped lay some track or something. And it's just all kinds of little bits and pieces through those little over 2 million entries that I went through.
2 million.
And 2 million names plus all of the vouchers under each one. And then I did the same thing with the officers, go through the Confederate officers, and I went through every single one of them. And that's where I ran across some really interesting stuff, like the reports from a commissary officer. He was sent on inspection reports, on inspection trips 3 different times. And here are his reports from each station. This is what needs to be shipped, and this is how many trains they got. And it's just unbelievable. Who would know to go look for it? But I ran across it. So it's been interesting that the vast majority of what I found that's useful is either annual reports or is in the National Archives. Lots of little bits and pieces other places, but that's the core of it there.
Right. So, there's a few of us that enjoy the operational aspect of our railroads versus just, running trains, which is why your work has been so magnificent, because we get to see exactly what might have been shipped, or at least where was the destination and what was going there. There might be some missing pieces, but the beauty of that is it gives you kind of poetic license to do what you want to do in terms of scheduling and what cars to put them in.
Yeah.
So everything that you just described with what you found from officers' reports, that information too is on your website?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Most of it you can get to by going to the essays section, up on the top, essays.
Yes.
Go through it and then go down the subjects. You'll find, I think it's Major Smith's inspection reports or something like that.
Right.
And there are about 40 or 50 of them.
So how did you connect with our group?
Somebody, I can't remember who, contacted me about 8 or 10 years ago and said, "Hey, I'm part of this model railroad group, and we're looking for a sample of a through waybill. You got one?" And I was able to get him to one. He said, "Yeah, if it weren't just a model group, probably be interesting, but that's all we're doing." Disappeared. About 2 years later, somebody else contacted me and wanted something. I forgot what it was. And he said, "Hey, now you really ought to join this group. I'll contact the guy who's in charge," must meaning you, "and tell him you're coming. You send him an email as to get in." So that's how I ended up in the group.
How has your experience and expertise around logistics, what role has that played in your drive and your ability to assemble all of this information? Is there any connection there?
The only main one would be kind of a reality check in what I find, like the one train a day logistics. Okay, I have an idea of how much should be needed and how much they're able to put on that one train, but mostly it's It's just
Vaguely.
curiosity, digging up whatever I can find and trying to make sense out of it. On another site called Civil War Talk, I've had I've had a thing going here the last 2 or 3 days, trying to figure out whether in just before the Peninsula Campaign got started, whether there was a force that left the Norfolk area and headed toward Weldon with the purpose of cutting the railroad there. One of the newspapers from Petersburg says, yeah, they're there. They're in such and such a depot, and there's 7,000 of them. So I'm trying to find out if that's true. So I got a lot of people looking. Nobody has found it. I think it was fantasy.
Whoa! So even when you read something in one of the local newspapers, you gotta check it.
Buyer beware.
Right. Right. Were you able to ever uncover the average size, like the number of cars that would be attached to a train, or was it just really dependent on? I guess it was probably mostly dependent on what is the material products they were shipping.
What mattered was how much the locomotive could pull. And that was determined by the size of the locomotive. They didn't just buy what was out there. They bought the smallest that they could, because that would be the cheapest. The smallest that they could that would handle their road. Well, this road is flat, so he can run 15, 18, 20 cars, unless you bought a cheap locomotive, smaller one, because you didn't expect that kind of business. He can only run 6 cars.
Right.
The next guy, he goes up through the hills. He could do 10, 12, 14 cars because they got a big, strong locomotive, because they knew they were going to have to fight with those hills. So the number of cars in anything other than the main supply lines, those trains ran around 8 cars. And on the main lines, there were 10 to 15 cars at a time. The passenger trains were different because the passenger coaches were so much heavier, but that was basically the way.
Did you ever find where there was an indication? Because one of the things I've been looking at is how many passenger cars would have been attached to a train. I'm thinking 2 or 3 at the most, or you think more?
No, I've seen 4 quite a number of times, plus a baggage car, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
many of them would also have an express car. So there'd be the baggage car, then the express car, and then up to 4 passenger cars.
So you have this new book coming out. You don't have a title yet, but it's going to be working with. It's interesting because that was one of the things that fascinated me, was how long it took for the Confederacy to really pay attention to the fact that the railroads were key to any kind of victory they were hoping for. Did you, in the initial research that you've been doing, what have been the 1 or 2 factors that have been the biggest obstacles for that to occur?
The equipment need was absolutely huge, and they got almost none of it. So you'll find on my website the equipment that they had, in the essay section, equipment that they had, and the equipment that they built and added during the war. And I think they added 3% of what they had when the war started. So it didn't even begin to cover wastage. Likewise, the lack of iron to make anything with, and the inability to re-roll the rails so that they could be used over again, because the Navy and the ordnance folks, controlled the iron foundries. Those were the problems on the railroad side. On the government side, it was the popular people do battles, and the people know what they're doing, do logistics. Well, we just had popular people. Nobody understood logistics. On the US side, they had quite a few people who, by the end of the second year, were just fabulous with logistics. But it was a learning curve for everybody. And unfortunately, the Confederate side didn't make an effort to find the right people. And they just took whoever was available that had some interest, like Sims. You know, he was the coordinator for the last half of the war for the Confederate railroads. What was his railroad experience? He was in the finance department or the accounting department of the Georgia Railroad for about 4 years. That really isn't what you need.
No.
You need somebody who really understands how this all works together. I think he did a fabulous job with the background that he had. But what they needed was someone with his temperament and his ability to get along with people and Wadley's knowledge. But Wadley was kind of a pompous guy, and he rubbed everybody the wrong way, and they got rid of him as soon as they could. But that was part of it. They just didn't have many people to choose from, and no one really made the concerted effort to let's find the best guy for this position. They just, hey, this guy happens to be available.
Right.
Yeah, another interesting little thing is the railroad system was kind of the Savannah Club. Wadley was from Savannah. Lawton, the quartermaster general, was from Savannah. Sims was Savannah. There are two more I can't remember right this second. All from Savannah, all knew each other, all good friends. And they ran the whole show more or less.
Fascinating, right? So it was more like the network of who you knew versus who's capable. I believe, and you can check me on this, and I'm wondering how much of this played into it, because either from a personnel resource or from just a material resource, they were short. I wonder how much of the privatization of the railroads, like the resistance that the government got from those that just wanted to keep a business going, and either the lack of or the minimal cooperation that the government got from the private railroads.
Well, the need seen early in the war and repeated over and over and over by the railroad people, by the railroad army people, was the government needed to control the main railroads. And there's even a bill that was introduced to do that in '62. And I just found a copy of it the other day. So if you look on my recent transcriptions, it's back about 10, 15, 20. You'll find it there. But the rest of Congress wouldn't pass it. And Davis probably wouldn't have signed it if it got to him. So since they couldn't force the system, they kind of put it in piecemeal. And by the time you get to the latter part of Sims, you'll see he's put all of that in, except the control of the railroads. They never got that. They gave Davis a bill late in the war allowing them to take control, and he signed it. But he never directed anyone to take control of any road, except Sims was told he could take control of the Piedmont Railroad about December of '64 if he thought that would help. Well, he was down there and he looked it over and says, "Now, what I need Dottie Meade to be my superintendent here, and he can straighten things out." And it looks like he did. The reports from then on, if you look at Dottie Meade's biography and look at the latter documents down there, it looks like he was put the thing together, but it was a little late.
Yeah, exactly. I've noticed, you have all the annual reports, I think, that are probably available that have some substance to it on your website. The beauty of what you've done is you've taken out the need to travel to any of these places for any of us, and you've got it all in this one section. And because I remember going down to Georgia Archives and the state archives and going through each of these, and it was pretty tedious, but to see them all right here available, huge savings of time. The one constant for all of us has been around discerning the colors of the cars. And could you say anything about that? You know, no.
They do not discuss colors in anything that I've seen. Once in a while, a newspaper article will talk about the color of a car, but those are all in 60, 61, and
Right.
I don't think that really is much help. You guys know about those 2 or 3 examples, but yeah, that's one reason I put open the website up for other people to see, is because I am spending all that time and effort going to find all of these things. You know, why should I make you do the same thing? I need to get this information out of here for my use. Just give you access to it too.
Has anybody visited your site and you got an email or something from somebody suggesting or offering other information to support your project?
Oh yeah. If you look down through the what's new, you'll see a lot of places added so-and-so provided by somebody. Okay. Yeah, if anyone provides me anything, I always give them credit for it on there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Good. What would you like us to know about your site that would be an impetus for us to check out? Anything in particular?
Well, those reports from Major Smith, the commissary guy, will give you a feeling as to how the commissary side was moving. And remember, the commissary and quartermaster were different bunches. The commissary provided human food, quartermaster provided animal food. So you see there's so many sacks of corn here, and it's the commissary guy talking about it. That's human corn. There are also sacks of corn that had been purchased for the horses. And they'd be sitting on the same loading dock, wanting the same spaces on the cars. I don't have any Major Smith on that side. But anyway, that is of use and of interest. If you have not looked at the list of places where they took up iron off the railroads, that's worthwhile. It's in the essays. It's one of the later ones. As far as I know, no one has ever put together a list of all the places that they took iron up from the railroads.
Not in one place.
I got the first one. So it's probably 200 entries, something like that.
Right.
I've broken it down by railroads, by year, and then each time it was picked up, I have transcribed that document and I link you to it there.
Well, I hope we'll see you in Baltimore. And I just want to thank you for giving your time today. And it's always a pleasure to talk to people who have such an interest, as diverse as they are, and the contributions that you all are making. So thank you for all of that time you devoted to the research, and all the best to you. I hope to see you on the next Zoom.
Thank you.
Cheers.